Chapter 6. Massacre. I returned to Blackstone with a secret unearthed from me master's hut. Nature had reclaimed all but one ivy-laden wall of crumbling timber, but I remembered his instructions as clear as the day he buried it. It's a bard's prerogative to nurture the mystery for now. Suffice to say that I returned armed with more than my wit and lore. Someone else had a secret too, and it remains such a secret to this day that I cannot be sure of the details. But why agonize like a Durian merchant over pennies when it is the sweep of the story that carries us? Picture this. A man who is no man visited the abbot on a bitter winter's night under the cover of a blizzard. He slips into the monastery despite its raised drawbridge and austere walls. Then, unerringly, he finds the study of Leusios Scutarius. Jorwin Weaver, The Katish Cycle. "You sought a catalixos?" the hooded man asked, once he had shut the door behind him. Father Abbot Leusios Scutarius had been reading by the light of a single candle. Now he considered the hooded man as one studies a dagger. The frosty winter only discomforted his body. This man sent a chill deep into his soul. If he and his brethren were the spirit of the corpus, then this catalixos was its hard-edged pragmatism.
"Yes, I asked for one of the Presidius lens. I see the likeness, but you were here before I sent the bird."
"The Pater Custodius has taken a personal interest in the matter since one of your shrines shattered," the man said. "My name is Akabos."
"That was 7 years ago,"
Leusios snapped.
"And there were specific circumstances."
"Yes, the Pater Custodius asked me to watch Kerne." The snow had frozen to the visitor's cloak and glittered in the candlelight. It would not melt in here, it was too cold. He'd let the fire die, a deception to make his brothers believe he had retired to bed. The last thing he had burned on the dying embers had been the letter warning him of Akabos's visit. He stood and walked to the small window to look down on the mirror mist. The vapors rising from the warm waters of the pool sparkled as they turned into motes of ice. The glittering held his meditative thoughts. The hooded man remained patiently still. Kerne, his greatest failure, or an impossible task. Eventually, Leusios turned back, his thinking structured and clear.
"Are you under my orders, Akabos?"
"Within limits. Ultimately, I answer to the Presidius lens."
"We tread a fine line. The monastery must be sustainable, yet Blackstone cannot prosper by mining that gold. They provide for our basic needs and are ignorant of our higher purpose. Vidnia Aquitus is important because she represents the corpus vigilos to the village. Your actions must not implicate her."
"Vidnia is expendable, as you or any other in the cause of protecting humanity." The response of a fanatic, thought Leusios. He raised a finger for emphasis.
"Stop the mining, but do not resort to murder. No killings."
Akabos's jaw tensed. "The corpus has waited centuries for this fight. Prayers will aid us, but alone cannot prevail. If evil is coming, then I am willing to kill to prevent it."
"As a warrior monk, so am I. The brethren of this place will kill and be killed to protect humanity. But to stain our souls with murder betrays our reason to exist. This is my rule."
Akabos grimaced, but nodded. Kerne split his time between the comfort of Elayna's home and solitude in the mountains. Silent meditation in his cave became a necessity to control his inner turmoil. She had awoken such a yearning for acceptance, and the orc within would rage at his enforced patience. So, when news of an accident at the mine came, he was quick to help. An avalanche had buried a mine entrance. It was a miracle no one was killed. "We thought it a haunting," one miner explained. "We saw this ghost and fled the mine before the disaster, but maybe a spirit warned us." More disasters ensued. A shed burned down, destroying valuable tools. The mine road was blocked by a landslide, and food supplies spoiled. The miners started to mutter about an evil presence. That was where Jorwin Weaver found Kerne puzzling over rotting meat and grain. "How I enjoy your mountain air!" Amusement lit the bard's eyes as he covered his mouth and nose from the stench. "Jorwin!" Kerne gripped the other man's arm in greeting and immediately saw the bard's new walking staff. "That is the work of a master," he said in admiration. Carvings, perhaps letters, flowed down the length of the fine oak. The bard grinned and slid off the leather hood to reveal a blade equal to the beauty of the wood. It had the likeness of a narrow leaf tapered to a killing point. The base of the head was gripped by a burnished bronze ring, expertly shaped into a crown of flames. The bard gestured to the stinking supplies. "What's going on here?" "A puzzle," Kerne admitted. "Hardly the season for maggots." Jorwin pointed at the little white bodies. "They're dead." Jorwin shrugged. "The food is so far gone that it even poisons maggots?" "I'm not convinced." Kerne squatted down to pick up several and sniffed them. "I think the maggots were already dead and scattered later." Humans did not have his articulate sense of smell. Where strong odors overwhelmed weaker ones, his discerned layers and complexities. Under the pungency of decay was still a mouth-watering scent of cured meat. He picked up a joint of smoked mutton and tore it open. It may have stank, but the meat looked fibrous and tasty. With his breath held, he sank his pointed teeth into it and ripped out a hunk. Try some." Jorwin flinched. "You're joking." "No, it's good. This food isn't spoiled." "But the smell, the maggots." "I can't explain it." "Bring that." He pointed at a ham joint. Kerne borrowed a pickaxe and called to the huddle of Keetish and Durian supervisors watching him. "Follow me." He walked down to the pond that filled one side of the canyon. Some of the overseers sneered and spat into the snow. "Aren't you at least curious?" Jorwin grinned at them, hefting the stinking ham. "I know I am." They trailed after him in sullen silence. Kerne raised the pickaxe and broke the ice with two powerful blows. He knelt over the hole to speak a blessing to Elayna. Then he beckoned to Jorwin for the ham. He dunked it several times and rubbed it all over. Then he sniffed it. Much better. "Wash what food you can in here. You will find it edible after that." Most of them scowled in disbelief and drifted away. Kerne sighed, their rejection now biting deeper than a year ago, before Elayna. "Don't worry." Jorwin pointed at a couple of overseers who looked more worried than annoyed. They were heading back to the stores. "Those two will try it." "How can you tell?" Kerne asked. "They're Keats. The Durians can afford the waste. Our folk know how precious a full belly is, and will try anything." Kerne sucked air through his razor teeth. "I wish I had your gift for reading people." "Aye, lad, give it time, and you'll surprise yourself. Now, I need to tell you why I came. Marcus Ambronius is dead. Leusios and Vibnia need your help." Corpses, like food, didn't rot in winter. They froze. The camp of dead men was in an area where the southern forest fell back from the trade road. The clearing had given the Durians enough space to make a wide perimeter for sentry fires. Inside it, powdery snow shrouded tents and bodies alike. The snow was not the velvety lowland type, but diamond-hard dust blown down from the mountains by the northern winds. Canvases flapped in the wind, showering Kerne with frozen crystals. He had seen the carnage after orcish battles. In comparison, this massacre had been a discreet affair. Most of the dead were still in their tents, speared or knifed where they slept. Kerne brushed a spike of ice from his cheek. The bodies, stripped of armor and clothes, were a feast for the forest scavengers at this meager time of year, yet they had stayed away. Why?
"This isn't natural,"
Jorwin muttered. Kerne grunted in agreement. He walked around the camp perimeter and noted how each sentry had fallen into the snow and then had their throats slit. Their bodies were evenly spaced except for the side farthest from the road, closest to the forest. Given Marcos's impeccable planning, he was surprised there was a gap of about 4 or 5 men, wide enough to let an enemy slip into camp, kill the other guards, and slaughter the rest. But how could they take trained legionaries by surprise? He wondered aloud. "I found Marcos," Vibnia called from the center of the camp. Kerne and the others joined the priest at the noble's tent as she took a long swig from her flask. Its front pole was at an angle, and the body was half out. Kerne grasped the story immediately. He woke and rose from his tent, only to be stabbed at the entrance. Like every other body, Marcos Ambronius had been stripped. It was an ignoble end. Why did he accompany this shipment? Kerne asked.
"It was a big one," Leusios replied. "House Delianus has been luckiest by far."
"Not so lucky now," Jorwin quipped dryly.
"For bandits, they've been very thorough."
"No, they missed the value of the tents," Vibnia pointed out. "Military-grade canvas fetches a good price."
"What of the carts?" Kerne asked Jorwin.
"Taken back to the road and on to Duria, and no attempt to hide the tracks. And yet the attackers disappeared like ghosts." Kerne studied the woods around them. They were dark and had the same grim stillness as the frozen corpses. Orcs were a people of the open wilderness, hunting the various shaggy herds that wandered the steppes. Some tribes retreated to the deep pine forests during winter, but not his tribe. For him, forests were crowded places where danger hung close. "Something's watching us." He spoke the instinct without thinking. "Where?" Vibnia's gloved hand went to her bow. Jorwin scanned the trees.
"I see nothing,
but I feel." Kerne had an orc's confidence in his instincts, but the warning faded. Whatever it was, it's gone. Trubios Swat had brought his carts to carry the dead, driven by him, Dugain, and Hanley. They'd stayed back and now gingerly approached the edge of the massacre. Trubios blew his sprout-like nose.
"We'd better load them up."
"I'm surprised Teneos didn't insist on collecting his brother," Kerne admitted as they watched Trubios' cart trundle away with their tragic cargo. Vibnia nodded and was about to speak when a sharp gust of wind tossed a flurry of ice darts into their faces. She shrank into her woolen hood and let that pass before speaking. "You are more right than you know, Kerne. It is the family's responsibility to ensure the dead are cremated and their ashes returned to the household tomb. There they are interred behind a stone that lists their deeds." She clapped her leather gauntlets together and stamped her narrow boots to restore the circulation in her feet. "Can we move on before I freeze?" "Where to?" asked Kerne. "The bandits' tracks have vanished, and the stolen carts have a long head start."
"We follow the gold,"
Leusios decided. "On foot?" Vibnia shivered.
"The carts are pulled by oxen,"
the younger man reasoned.
"We can catch them."
"We'll need to keep a good pace," Kerne added apologetically. Vibnia put on a pained expression, but did not protest. Instead, she produced the flask from within her robes and took a long swig.
"Then why wait?"
declared Jorwin heartily. They set off south. The Keetish winter seeped into their joints and bones every time they stopped. Kerne was less bothered by the chill, but he was worried that they would wake one morning to find Vibnia frozen.
"Close now,"
Jorwin announced after a few days.
"Can't be more than 2 days and we'll have them."
"Still no escort?" asked Kerne.
"No, just 3 carts."
"That doesn't make sense." Those carts carry enough gold for the bandits to live well for years, and yet they send them south without protection.
Let's be grateful for their overconfidence.
Leusios grinned. 2 days later, the wheel tracks were fresh, untouched by the occasional flurry of snow. They upped their pace. Kerne started to feel the excitement of imminent battle. Jorwin ran ahead to a bend in the road as it crested a hill. The forest was thick, making it easy for him to scout their quarry and remain unnoticed. When he returned, the bard looked baffled. "What's wrong?" asked Kerne.
"I've seen them. The carts are being driven by Thaliani legionaries, not bandits."
"5?"
"Aye. 2 on the first cart, 2 on the second, and 1 on the third. How did you guess, Kerne?"
"It's the number of missing sentries." With the betrayal proven, he felt a growl of orcish anger. He was not the only one.
"Traitors!"
hissed Leusios.
"Be steady," Vibnia said sternly. "We should get prisoners to understand what happened."
"Of course." Kerne felt abashed at letting the orc slip out.
"Let's not be shy. If they don't surrender, they die,"
Jorwin said matter-of-fact, and plucked the leather hood free from his spear. Everyone agreed that to defeat 5 professional soldiers, they needed a good plan. They sprang it when the road turned sharply to avoid a rock outcropping. As the carts turned the corner, Jorwin and Vibnia moved into the woods and stalked parallel to the road. Kerne and Leusios ran to the bend. Turning the corner, they sprinted the last few yards. Kerne prayed the legionary on the rear cart would not look around and that the rattle and squeak of the axles would cover their footfalls on the snowy road. There was the hiss of an arrow and a cry. Vibnia had shot the lead legionary in the shoulder. Jorwin burst from the woods. The legionaries were slow to react, as if startled from a dream. Jorwin swung at the other man on the lead cart, slamming the spear haft into his jaw and dropping him. Kerne surged forwards, overtaking the rear cart. The driver sat alone, and after an initial cry of astonishment, cracked his whip to slice across his face. Kerne twisted, and it slashed his shoulder instead. His toughened leather took most of the pain out of the blow. He dragged the man off the driver's board and head-butted him with his helmet. The soldier went limp. That left 2 in the middle cart. Seeing Lucius close on them and blocked by the lead cart, the legionaries jumped down, pulling out swords and hefting their shields. Keeping the cart at their back, they warded the young lad off with their blades. Leusios backed off and waited for Kerne and Jorwin to join him. The 2 soldiers stood close, wild-eyed and disheveled. They were a disgrace to Duria. Kerne glanced at Jorwin. The bard raised an eyebrow. What next? He drew his greatsword, thinking carefully. The wrong move could be the death of Jorwin or Leusios. So, for several ragged breaths, they stared at each other, tense and unmoving.
"Why?"
Leusios burst out.
"How could you betray your own commander?"
Durian veterans were grim, stony men, yet these 2 flinched at the accusation.
"You're not men, but dogs!"
Leusios unleashed a torrent of abuse, brandishing nothing more than his long knife. Kerne stared in disbelief as he saw a tear well inside one veteran's eye and then roll down his cheek. Leusios seemed oblivious to this, cursing them as traitors with every profane word Kerne knew, and many he didn't. One of them cried out in a strangled sob, "We had to. She made us do it." By his abrupt silence, Leusios had obviously not expected such a bizarre answer. "Who?" Kerne asked.
"I,"
the legionary squirmed.
"I can't say." "Tell me!"
roared Leusios as he lunged for the man. It was an insane move against sword and shield, but it worked. As the lad seized the legionary, Jorwin darted in and struck the second soldier hard on the cheekplate. The man reeled, losing his helmet. Kerne stepped in and punched him out. "Thanks," he muttered to Jorwin as the man slid down the cart and collapsed onto the frozen ground. Leusios was still shaking his men by his lamella armor and slamming him back into the cart.
"Tell me!"
The man looked dazed, his eyes glassy.
"I was on duty. She just walked out of the woods."
Kerne listened incredulously as Leusios shook the story out of the Durian. A woman had walked out of the woods with some sort of huge hound. He and the other 4 sentries had not wanted to hurt her. The rest of the sentries had toppled where they stood into a deep slumber. On her instruction, they stood to one side while brigands flooded the camp and slaughtered their comrades. Then she'd asked them to drive the cart south. These veterans of Duria had followed her request like trained dogs. Once his story had been spilled, the legionary sagged into Leusios's grip and fell unconscious.
"I smell magic,"
growled Jorwin. Kerne jumped onto the cart and inspected the seals on the crates. Not even opened. The gold's still here.
"Then we'd better get it back to Blackstone,"
murmured Leusios, now deep in thought and his anger gone.
"Bind the prisoners."
Vibnia agreed with him, but Jorwin balked.
"What will happen to them back in Blackstone?"
the bard asked. The priest glanced at Leusios, but the young man had wandered a little way from them, preoccupied by his thoughts. "Blackstone law is basic," she shrugged. "I suspect the council would hand them to House Thelianus."
"And then?"
asked Kerne. "Execution. They were on watch and failed in their duty."
"But their story,"
protested Jorwin. "Only highborn Durians are familiar with magic, and even they fear and distrust it," Vibnia explained. "The more credible explanation is that they were bribed."
"By Caesonius, perhaps?"
Kerne suggested. His instincts were the same as Jorwin's. The men were victims of some sort of bewitchment. It was the only way to explain their strange behavior. Their prospect for justice was slim, but what if they were guilty? He felt torn. His monastic upbringing had instilled a faith in authority, despite his rebellion.
"Perhaps Leusios would ensure a fair trial."
"What?" Leusios responded to his name. The younger man brought a clenched fist to his lips and then straightened his index finger as if drawing out his decision upon its tip.
"Yes, we need a trial. It must be full and thorough. I want to hear what the Durians know about magic in the interests of a fair hearing for these men. Elayna could help us there."
Elayna burned. She wanted to scream, but her lungs drew in scorching air. Her skin peeled and split. The flesh immediately cauterized, only to split again. The flame enveloping her fell away, and ice-cold air rushed in. She screamed out loud and sat up. Her hut was dark, save for the dying embers in the hearth. Still in a panic, she looked at her hands and felt her face. Her skin was smooth and unmarked. Another dream. Her heart was thundering. She dared not sleep again. With a shaking hand, she put kindling in the hearth and coaxed a flame from the embers. "So clear," she murmured to herself and shuddered. An afterthought of tears came to her. "It's just a dream," she insisted through quiet sobs. There was a crunch of a foot breaking a frozen puddle outside. Elayna's eyes darted to the bolt Kerne had made for her. It was secure. One of the wooden steps up to her door creaked. She picked up her knife and pressed herself close to the timber wall beside the latch. Someone was breathing close to the door. The breath was not hearty like Kerne's. It was awkward, made by lungs ill-suited to whatever effort they had endured to get here. A shuffle. She tightened her grip on the knife. The door shifted and immediately stopped, held fast by Kerne's bolt. The pressure remained for only a moment and then fell back. There was a small, strangled sound, whether from frustration or sorrow, she could not tell. The silence stretched out until she heard the soft scrunch of snow underfoot, a little away from the hut. She moved to a spy hole and watched a spindly form vanishing in the darkness. Charga, the orc outcast. She returned to her fire and put on a pot of water. She wasn't going to sleep any more tonight. Leusios was thankful to ride a cart home. His feet had blisters and his legs had not stopped aching since the first day of the chase. Not that he complained. He wasn't going to show weakness to the others. Anyway, he had something to think about. He had used magic again. It had not come in a rush of light and flame, but it had still shaken him with its ferocity. No one had noticed. He had neither eaten beans nor drunk the little bottle of essence hidden inside his winter coat. Yes, he had lost his temper. That was when he had felt the magic surge. Perhaps, like a worn path, the more he used it, the easier it came to him. It was as if a third eye had come alive for him. He had seen a compulsion bound around the legionary's skull like bands of iron. Wrought by magic, it was another's will telling the soldier how to think and act. And he had broken it. He had no doubts about their story, and his guts churned with excitement and trepidation. Not a magus, but an enemy maga was involved with the bandits. She might have scrolls, even books he could take. Orthos, the legionary he had freed, remained pliable, but the charm persisted on the other four. Subtle experiments to release them was like scratching fingernails against the stone door. To his frustration, Leusios could not connect to the source that had fed him the power. The men pleaded to be let go, the compulsion causing them greater and greater distress the further north they traveled. The nights were too long to spend just sleeping, so they talked in a triangle made by the carts and oxen. Leusios found the conversations around the campfire fascinating. Jorwin filled most of the time with tales from amusing anecdotes to true epics. The surprise contributor was Vibnia. Always keeping her voice soft and measured, she shared her experiences of Duria and spoke of the Corpus Vigilos. The church acknowledged the Great Spirit, she explained, but bowed to none but the divine. The woman also showed a subtle and dry wit that delighted Jorwin in particular. Kerne had the least to say. As a threat to his plans for Elayna and her crop, Leusios wanted to understand the half-orc more. He failed utterly. Kerne was polite, but not forthcoming. For his part, Leusios was eager to share his vision of Blackstone.
We need to build our village into a town, like in Duria. Blackstone could be a thriving center of Keetish culture.
Kerne and Vibnia questioned him out of curiosity rather than opposition, but Jorwin Weaver was more circumspect.
Keats have never needed towns.
Leusios brushed that off.
What's a town but a large and more prosperous village? Many Keats carry their villages on the backs of their oxen, Jorwin argued. Those villages that do take root are bound to the land. Blackstone is more self-serving than self-sufficient. Don't make the mistake of thinking that prosperity lives through coin. The prosperity of our people comes from the twin bonds of kinship and friendship. Put money above that, and we cease to be a single people. But Blackstone's community grows even stronger as its wealth grows,
Leusios retorted. Jorwin was about to reply when he stiffened.
It's back, he hissed.
What? Leusios shifted his position to look around.
Don't look. Kerne, do you see it?
The half-orc followed the bard's pupils without moving his head.
Yes. 2 points of yellow light, like eyes. They are eyes, Jorwin whispered. I saw them last night when I was on watch.
Leusios felt a shiver. He ached to turn around to get a good look.
Why didn't you tell me? It could be the hound.
Jorwin did not reply. Instead, he stroked his beard while watching intently out of the corner of his eye.
I see it too, whispered Vibnia. Shall I shoot it? It'll be gone before you string your bow. Everyone be extra watchful tonight. I'll take the first watch,
Leusios offered. No, I will, said Kerne firmly. Despite the sighting, the night passed without incident, or so Leusios thought until he saw Orthos, the legionary he freed, preparing breakfast without any sign of the other four.
Morca's teeth. Where are the others?
Jorwin looked him in the eye.
When the watcher in the woods was gone, I let them flee south. Only this one, he indicated Orthos, wanted to stay. I told him it was suicide.
Leusios bit his tongue.
This was a disaster.
He worked hard to make his next question sound more curious than strangled with frustration. "Why? I'm a Keetish bard, outside of your village. Your artifice of civilization holds no sway. There's no law here, only the wisdom of the wilds. I would have argued in their favor. I believe you. They were enchanted." Orthos looked up from the cooking pot at Leusios. "I put my trust in you, sir." Jorwin ignored him. "There would have been no fair trial in Blackstone. Mistress Murgathwin would have handed them to House Delianus and to their deaths. I've let them take their chances with the wilderness. That is my judgment." His judgment. Leusios fumed at the arrogance in Jorwin's words. "And what if they run back to the bandits and betray us?" "Leusios, there's another reason to let them go." Kerne nodded towards the woods. "Whatever is stalking us may have a hold on them. I can't trust having them here in our midst." "It is done," said Vibnia simply. "We should get moving." Leusios felt a rush of blood to his cheeks. Scorch it! He mounted up on the cart, deliberately choosing the seat next to Kerne. The half-orc smiled at him and coaxed the oxen to a walk. "I was very impressed by how you stood up to Leusios on Toolfest." The compliment took Leusios by surprise, and he grinned. "Thanks, Kerne. Do you feel torn?" Kerne shook his head. "No. I'll stand with Blackstone, if they accept me." The next night, Leusios was alone on watch when he saw the eyes for himself. The wind was strong, keeping the whole forest alive with an undulating roar. The blustery weather buffeted their camp in the darkness. The moon was hidden, so only their little fire in the triangle of carts gave light. It was the most evil sensation he had ever experienced. He could tell they were eyes by their shape. More was communicated at a primal level. They were predators' eyes, and they were moving towards him. As he opened his mouth to shout, a break in the clouds flooded the snow with moonlight. Then there was no beast at all. A beautiful woman was walking towards him. The woods were no longer in winter's grip, but flush with spring colors. He felt the fresh balm of warm air after the rains, and discarded winter's chill as a bad memory. She held his attention absolutely. She wore a floating black robe, impractical and thin, yet it appealed to him as a man. She beckoned to him, and he immediately jumped down from the cart. "Who are you?" he asked. She did not answer. Instead, she raised the beckoning finger to her lips. Her eyes promised delights and drew him closer until her arms encircled his neck. He caught her midriff and slid his hands upwards. Her cheek brushed his. "Sleep, my young Keetish buck. Sleep." Sleep? He felt a moment of dizziness, then shook it off. It was the last thought he had on his mind when so aroused. He caught her neck with one hand and kissed her, sending the other hand questing to find the smooth skin under her dress. Joyfully out of control, he pressed his body against her urgently. "Sleep, I say." The order struck him, reinforced by power. Possessed by an irrational passion, he ignored it and bore her down to the spring grasses as he would a playful whore. With one hand, he expertly freed his belt and let his trousers slip free. "Get off me, boy!" She twisted away violently. He tumbled face first into a snowdrift. The woman was gone. A huge hound spun away, scattering snowflakes as it dashed back into the dark forest. He lunged after it, only to plunge into yet more snow. He lay sprawled on his front, with the wind freezing his ass and the icy snow sucking the ardor out of his naked loins. He swore and glanced back, relieved that no one had woken to see his humiliation, just as no one had woken when Marcos's sentries had been taken. That was how the sentries had fallen prey to the bandits. His heart beat wildly as he backed towards their fire, scanning the woods and pulling his trousers up as he went. Exhilaration overcame fear, for he, Leusios Miller, untrained and ignorant of magic as he was, had faced the Magi. And I won. He told them about the eyes the next day, but nothing more. When they resumed traveling, it was a struggle to keep the self-satisfied grin off his face, right up to the moment when Kerne died. And that ends Chapter 6. Chris says we can all blame him for leaving us on a cliffhanger. In the next chapter, we'll find out more as all hell breaks loose. See you in a week.